My name is Marina, and this is the story I never thought I would tell. I am not someone people notice in a room. I do not speak loudly. I do not wear beautiful clothes. For most of my life, I stayed in the background, cleaning up after others and trying not to be a burden. But something happened that changed everything. Something real. Something unexpected. I began as the maid in his house. But by the end, I became someone much more. This is how it began. The mop slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a loud thud. I bent down to pick it up, but before I could reach it, the door behind me opened. I froze for a second, thinking I might be in trouble. Then I heard his voice, quiet, polite, and without emotion, asking if I had seen his briefcase. I turned and pointed to the living room, keeping my eyes low. That was how our days usually went. He spoke. I answered. Then I went back to cleaning like I was part of the furniture. My name is Marina, and at the time, I was a maid in Mr. Bennett's home. The house was large, much bigger than any place I had ever lived. It had white walls, glass doors, and polished wooden floors that showed every footprint. Mr. Bennett was a businessman. He owned 2 companies, and everyone in the town seemed to know his name. But to me, he was simply the man who left early, came home late, and never forgot to say thank you. He wasn't cold, just distant. And I understood. People like him had their world. People like me had ours. When I first got the job, I didn't expect much. I needed the money. My mother was sick back home in the village. I had no college degree, and my last job had ended badly. This job came through a friend of a friend, and I promised myself I would keep my head down and do it well. I wore second-hand shoes and carried my lunch in a cloth bag. I had 1 coat for every season, and I stayed in the small back room next to the laundry. It had no windows, but it was quiet. I liked quiet. Every morning, I made his coffee at 7 o'clock. He liked it black, no sugar. Then I cleaned the kitchen, watered the garden, and polished the hallway mirrors. He left by 8:30 and returned around 6 o'clock. I made dinner and disappeared before he sat down to eat. It was a rhythm. Simple. Clean. Safe. I never expected it to change. But one evening, something did change. It started with a sudden rain. The sky turned dark and thunder rolled over the hills. I was in the middle of scrubbing the stair rail when the power went out. The whole house sank into silence. I stood still, heart racing. I had always feared the dark. It reminded me of being young and powerless. I fumbled to find my way to the kitchen when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw him holding a candle. His face, usually hidden behind shadows and distance, looked soft in the flickering light. He asked if I was all right. I said yes, though my hands were shaking. He told me to sit, and then he made the tea himself. I tried to stop him. I said it was my job, but he waved me off gently. "You do everything," he said. "Tonight, you can rest." So I sat, unsure of what to do with my hands or my eyes. He placed a cup of tea in front of me and then sat across the table. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he asked something no one had asked me in a long time. He asked my name. Of course, he had known it before. But that night, he asked it like he wanted to hear it from me, like it mattered. I said, "Marina." He smiled. "Marina," he repeated, as if testing the sound. From that night, things began to shift. He started greeting me not just with good morning, but with small questions. How was your weekend? Did you sleep well? I kept my answers short at first. I didn't trust it. Kindness often came with a price. But with time, I started to respond. I told him about my village, about my mother and the small bakery she once ran. I mentioned how I used to help her roll the dough early in the morning, how the scent of bread reminded me of home. One day, after I cleaned the upstairs study, I found a small wrapped package on my bed. Inside was a set of watercolor pencils and a sketchbook. My hands trembled as I touched them. He had remembered. I had once told him, in passing, that I liked to draw flowers. That night, I sat in my room and drew a jasmine plant, the kind that used to grow outside our kitchen window back home. The next morning, I left the sketch on the edge of the counter while making breakfast. I didn't plan to. It just slipped out with the rush of buttered toast and boiled eggs. When I came back from dusting the hallway, there was a note under the drawing. It said, "You have a gift. Don't stop." I folded the note and placed it in my apron pocket. I still have it today. As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Seen. Not just as the maid who scrubbed floors and folded shirts, but as a person. He began asking deeper questions. What do you think about this painting? Do you like music? I was careful, always careful, but I couldn't stop the corners of my mouth from rising when he walked in. I caught myself humming while cleaning. I lingered a bit longer by the window in the evening light, pencils in hand. Then came the afternoon he asked if I wanted to join him at the weekend market. I blinked in surprise. You mean, go with you? I asked. He nodded. I wore the nicest thing I owned, a navy blue dress that had belonged to my cousin. I borrowed lipstick from a neighbor and brushed my hair 3 times more than usual. When he saw me, he didn't say anything right away. He just looked and then said, "You look lovely, Marina." We walked side by side. Some people stared. I noticed, but he didn't seem to care. At the flower stall, he let me choose. I picked a bundle of lavender. At the bookstore, he handed me a book on garden illustrations. I held it like it was made of glass. On the way back, we passed a bakery. The scent pulled me in. He bought 2 loaves and handed me one without a word. I held it close all the way home. Something was changing, but I didn't have a name for it. I only knew that when I sat at the kitchen table sketching that night, I drew not just flowers but a man's hand beside a teacup. I erased it before finishing, afraid of what it meant. I was his maid. He was my employer. These things had names, roles, rules. But then came the evening his sister came to visit. I had just returned from the store when I saw a sleek car parked outside. I entered quietly and saw her in the living room. She was tall, sharp-featured, and wore a pearl necklace that screamed money. She looked me over like I was dust on her shoes. "Who's she?" she asked, not even turning to him. He answered simply, "Marina. She works here." She raised an eyebrow. "You let the help speak so freely?" I felt my face burn. I wanted to disappear. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I sat on my bed and stared at my shoes. My name felt smaller. My hands felt heavier. The walls of the house, which had started to feel warm, now felt cold again. The old voice in my head returned, the one that said, You are nobody. Don't dream too much. Just as I was about to turn off the light, there was a soft knock on the door. Before I share the rest of my story, I need to know, where are you listening from? Knowing someone hears me, understands me, gives me strength. I opened the door slowly. Mr. Bennett stood there, holding a plate of food. You didn't eat, he said. I looked away, embarrassed. I wasn't hungry, I replied. He didn't believe me. He stepped into the room and placed the plate on my small table. My sister can be cruel, he said softly. I didn't answer. I didn't want to talk about her. I didn't want to talk at all. But he stayed. He pulled out the chair and sat across from me, just like he had the night the lights went out. Marina, he said, you don't have to let people make you feel small. I wanted to believe him, but it was hard. People like his sister belonged in his world. I didn't. I whispered, she's right. I'm just the maid. He shook his head. No, you are Marina. You're the one who keeps this house warm. You're the reason it feels like a home. My eyes filled with tears, but I turned away quickly. I didn't want him to see me cry. He stood and touched my shoulder gently. Don't let her steal your light, he said. Then he left, closing the door softly behind him. After that night, something inside me changed. I still worked hard, cleaning, cooking, watering the plants, but my spirit was quieter. I stopped sketching for a few days. I avoided the mirrors. I kept my music off. He noticed. He asked if everything was okay. I said yes, but he didn't believe me. One afternoon, he returned from work earlier than usual. I was in the kitchen preparing soup. He sat at the counter and watched me. You haven't smiled all week, he said. I kept chopping the carrots. I've just been tired, I replied. He stood up, walked over, and gently took the knife from my hand. Let's go somewhere, he said. Now? I asked, surprised. Yes, right now. He didn't wait for me to decide. He told me to grab a coat. I did, still unsure what was happening. We got into his car and drove out of town. The road twisted through quiet fields and old stone fences. After about an hour, we reached the coast. The sea was calm, and the sky had turned soft with evening light. We walked in silence along the shore. The wind pulled at my hair, and my shoes sank into the sand. He didn't try to talk. He just walked beside me, his hands in his pockets. Then, finally, he stopped and turned to me. I brought you here because you needed air, he said. And maybe because I needed it too. I looked at him. He looked tired, but open. This is my favorite place, he continued. When things get too loud, I come here. I nodded, still unsure what to say. Marina, he said softly, I know this isn't easy for you. Being here, working here, feeling all the things you feel. I blinked quickly, trying to hold the tears back. I just want to be useful, I said. I don't want to cause trouble. I know people talk. He took a step closer. Let them talk. I know what's real. The wind picked up, and I wrapped my coat tighter. He looked out at the sea and said, You make me feel something I haven't felt in years. Peace. Joy. Something real. I didn't speak. My heart was beating too fast. Marina, he said, looking at me again. I care about you. I think you know that. I nodded, slowly. I did know. I had known for some time, but hearing him say it made my breath catch. He reached for my hand. His fingers were warm and steady. Let's not rush anything, he said. I don't want to scare you, but I do want you to know I see you, at all of you. I looked down at our hands. I've never felt this before, I admitted. Me neither, he said. We stood like that, quiet and still, while the sky darkened and the stars began to show. Back at the house, things felt different again. Lighter. He smiled more. I hummed again while I worked. I even returned to sketching. One evening, I left a drawing of the sea on the table. The next day, I found a flower pressed inside the sketchbook. A note beside it said, "For the artist who made me feel again." I pressed the note to my chest and closed my eyes. But the world outside our quiet moments didn't stay silent. One morning, as I walked to the market, I noticed two women whispering. One of them pointed at me. When I got to the bread stall, the vendor gave me a strange look. I brushed it off and hurried home. That evening, I found out why. Mr. Bennett showed me a magazine. On the cover was a picture of us walking side by side at the market. The headline read, "The Maid and the Millionaire." My stomach dropped. He looked at me carefully. I didn't know they took this, he said. I'm sorry. I shook my head. It's not your fault. But inside, I felt exposed. The photo made me look small. Out of place. Like I didn't belong. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the words over and over. The maid. Just the maid. Over the next few days, people looked at me differently. Whispers followed me through the market. Some people smiled with fake sweetness. Others avoided my eyes. I started to wonder if staying was a mistake. Maybe I should leave. Go back to my village. Hide from the attention. I didn't want to be the story people gossiped about. I didn't want to be the reason he was laughed at. When I finally told him how I felt, he didn't try to convince me with promises. He just said, I would rather be laughed at for loving you than respected for pretending I don't. That made me cry. He didn't stop me. He just held my hand and let me cry. 1 week later, he made a decision. He told me he was moving abroad for work and asked if I would come with him. I stared at him, shocked. You want me to come? I asked. He nodded. Not as a maid. As my partner. My heart twisted. People will talk, I said. Let them, he replied. We didn't make a big announcement. We packed our bags and flew away quietly. The city we moved to was clean and peaceful. No one knew my name there. No one whispered. We found a small apartment near a park. It had white walls and big windows. Every morning, I made tea and watched the leaves outside dance in the wind. He worked. I cleaned. But now, it was different. I was not hired help. I was home. Sometimes I missed my old life. The smell of bread baking, the sound of my mother's laughter, the rhythm of the town. But I was building something new. I began drawing again, More seriously, one afternoon, he came home with a surprise.
"I saw these and thought of you,"
he said, handing me a set of artist pencils. I smiled so wide I thought my face would burst. That night, I drew for hours. Flowers, doors, faces, dreams. The next morning, I put one of my drawings in a frame and placed it in the kitchen. When he saw it, he paused, then said, "You should show these to the world." I laughed softly. "Maybe one day," I said. But deep inside, something was waking up. Not just love, not just belonging, but a new kind of confidence. One morning at the market, I saw a sign for a weekend art fair. Artists were invited to set up small tables and sell their work. I walked past it at first, too nervous to consider it. But that night, I told Mr. Bennett about it. He looked at me, then said, "You should go. You have nothing to lose." I shook my head. "I'm not a real artist." He took my hand and said, "You are. You just haven't believed it yet." The next weekend, I woke up early and packed my drawings carefully in a cloth bag. I had 5 pieces I was proud of. I borrowed a folding table from our neighbor and set it up under a shady tree. At first, people only glanced. A few smiled politely. I stood behind the table with my hands folded, trying not to shake. Then a young girl stopped and pointed at a drawing of a window with flower pots. "I like this one," she said. "It feels like a dream." Her mother bought it. My first sale. I smiled all day. After that, I began going every weekend. I framed more drawings. I even started painting small cards. People stopped more often. They asked where I was from. I told them, "I used to work as a maid," I'd say, simply. One woman smiled and said, "That's honest work." That day, I felt something lift from my chest, like I didn't need to hide anymore. The art money wasn't much, but it felt powerful. I used it to buy fresh bread and small gifts for Mr. Bennett, a book he'd wanted, a wool scarf for the winter. I didn't tell him at first, but one evening, he found the coins in a glass jar by the window.
"Is this from the art?"
he asked. I nodded. He hugged me and whispered, "I'm so proud of you." Sometimes I sat at the window and watched the world go by. I didn't feel like a stranger anymore. I didn't feel like I was pretending. I was just Marina. I made tea in the mornings. I painted in the afternoons. I laughed more. I missed my mother, but I called her every week. She said my voice sounded happier. Then one winter afternoon, Mr. Bennett came home with news.
"My company wants to send me to another city,"
he said.
"It's a bigger job. More responsibility."
I looked at him carefully.
"Do you want to go?"
He nodded.
"But not without you."
I smiled.
"Then I'm ready."
We moved again, this time to a place with hills and snow. The air was colder, but the city was kind. We found a cozy apartment above a bakery. Every morning, the scent of bread filled our kitchen. I found a new art group nearby. The women there were warm and full of stories. One of them said, "You have soft hands. You must paint with your heart." I blushed. It was the nicest thing anyone had said to me. Months passed. Then one evening, I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, my heart nearly stopped. My mother stood there with a small suitcase and a nervous smile. It was her first time on a plane. Her eyes scanned the room, then landed on me. "You look different," she said. I hugged her tightly. "I feel different." During her visit, we cooked together and shared stories from home. I showed her my drawings. I took her to the market. She held my hand the whole time. One morning, she looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "You were never just a maid. You always had something special. I'm glad the world sees it now." After she flew home, I felt a quiet kind of peace. My past hadn't vanished. It had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I was no longer hiding. I was no longer afraid. I was painting more, laughing more, dreaming more. One spring morning, Mr. Bennett and I sat on the balcony watching the sunrise. He turned to me and said, "Do you ever regret it?" I looked at him and shook my head. "Not once." He smiled. "You changed my life, Marina." I leaned into his shoulder. "You changed mine." At that moment, I remembered the girl I once was, the one who scrubbed floors and whispered her own name. She was still inside me, but now she stood tall. She had love. She had a voice, and she was no longer afraid of the world. We didn't have a grand wedding. We didn't send out invitations or wear gold rings. We made tea, lit candles, and said simple vows on the balcony. He promised to listen. I promised to believe in myself. We kissed, and the world felt full. Now I paint every day. I write letters to my mother. I sell art at the weekend market. Some people still whisper when they hear I used to be a maid, but I don't mind. That's part of the story, and it's mine. So yes, I was the maid, but now I rule his heart. And more importantly, I've learned to rule my own life.